What's up, gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. In this video, we are going to get into some European cities that have been absolutely crushed, decimated, and destroyed by over-tourism and where you can go instead. But before we get into that, make sure to smash that like button. It costs you nothing, means the world to me, really helps me out with the algorithm, and I would truly appreciate it. So with all that good stuff out of the way, let's get into the European cities that have been absolutely destroyed by over-tourism and where to go instead. So first and foremost, these are in no particular order. And first I'm going to go through the places that have been overrun by tourists, and then I'm going to go through some better alternatives. And these aren't going to be travel dupes per se, just other alternative options. And some of these places are going to be a little more obvious than others, and some places are going to be less obvious. So the first place that comes to mind for me is Dubrovnik, and that is going to be a place that is severely impacted by tourism. In fact, someone was telling me that they get more tourists per capita or per inhabitant than anywhere else in the world, and believe you me, you can absolutely feel its impact when you're there about this time of year. Which is actually something I should touch on here real briefly. The places that are over-touristed, I don't recommend not going to them at all. I just recommend going to them during low or shoulder season, because they are still great places to visit and they offer a lot of things to do. The problem with them currently, or during high season should I say, is you may not be able to see the things that you want to do, whether that's because of extraordinary long lines or wait times, or because you just can't get access to these places because they've pre-sold all the tickets, which is one thing you need to be aware of. Many of the museums or other attractions, even restaurants in some of these places, are going to be pre-booked months in advance. So you can't really plan a last-minute trip. So, for example, my girlfriend and I went to Paris during Christmas time, and we did this kind of last minute kind of thing. We just showed up in Paris, and a bunch of the restaurants that we wanted to go to, we could not get into because they were booked for months in advance. Now, we did get kind of lucky because one of the restaurants we wanted to go to said no walk-ins essentially, with a little sign on the door. And as we literally walked up and were turning around, the lady came and flipped the sign around and was like, someone canceled. And so we just lucked into that. But I obviously would not bank on that happening for you. And I certainly wouldn't bank my trip around those kind of rare occurrences. Additionally, over-tourism causes increase in prices, and many of you have seen the news regarding Barcelona lately, where they have started spraying tourists with water guns because they want tourists to leave Barcelona. And so there is more anti-tourist sentiment in some of these places, although certainly not to the level of Barcelona. So with all that said, Dubrovnik is probably the first place I would avoid, especially during the summer months. Next, we might as well go with Barcelona, since I briefly touched on it before. Now, Barcelona, while it does have a lot to offer, and there is a lot of stuff to do there, well, you are going to run into that anti-foreigner sentiment, increasing prices, and I believe it's the pickpocket capital of Europe as well. And I must reiterate that I'm not saying you shouldn't go to these places. I just think you should go at a different time of year, which obviously has its drawbacks, because obviously high season is usually when these places have the best weather. But spoiler alert, one of the places that I'm going to recommend you should go instead is actually in Spain as well. And I actually lived in Spain. And so some of these places I actually would prefer to Barcelona personally. And no, it is not Madrid. Next, I would say a place like Bruges. Bruges is going to be severely over-touristed because you have tons of people going there on day trips. And so if you're there late at night or early in the morning, it's a much different city. but obviously not nearly as lively, not nearly as much to do, because all the tourists are gone, especially in the city center area. And so this is another place that during the day, I should say, is going to be very, very overcrowded. It is also known as Venice of the North. So if you're absolutely going to go there, I would probably stay the night to avoid the gobs of tourists who are there just from, I don't know, 12 to 6 p.m. or so, 12 to 5 p.m. And another spoiler alert, I have an even better recommendation, also in Belgium, where you should go instead. And speaking of this area, I'm going to throw Amsterdam on this list as well. It is also going to be very expensive and very overcrowded for the most part. Now, since it's closer to the more expensive end of the spectrum, it's not going to be as overcrowded as some of the other places on this list. But frankly, the place that I recommend on this list, I think is just a better option overall, because I personally think Amsterdam is a little overrated. Then I would say a place like Tallinn, probably a little overcrowded with tourists. For such a small place, it gets a ton of tourist visitors each and every year, and most of those tourist visitors are going to be at this time of year when the weather is nice. So Tallinn, not necessarily my favorite place to go this time of year, although it is certainly a beautiful country, and it does have a ton of things to offer. Once again, just not a place that I would highly recommend. And along this line, I would actually go with Praha, or Prague, however you want to say it. Now, in regards to Prague, it is one of my favorite cities on the entire planet. I think it has a ton to offer, and I think it is actually pretty decent value for the money. The problem is that the area where all the tourists go, the castle, the bridge, and the old town, are going to be absolutely jam-packed during these summer months. In fact, I'd go as far to say I don't think you're going to see any locals in those places just because it's so crowded. You are packed in there like sardines. And this obviously leads to long wait times, no access at all, and overcrowding, and excessively high prices, especially in the Old Town area. Now, you can get outside of this bubble, and that's going to help you tremendously, but those things, for the most part, are why people visit Prague. So I would once again recommend just going a different time of year. And this leads me to another place that has similar issues, and that is actually a place that I live, and that is Lisbon, Portugal. So Lisbon, Portugal, increasing in price, but there are an insane amount of tourists in Lisbon at this time of year. It is absolutely overcrowded and absolutely jam-packed in Lisbon, Portugal. The other thing with Lisbon, Portugal, not necessarily as walkable as other places on this list, because it is rather hilly, and it can be a little warmer. So you're going to have long lines, and if you're walking places in the heat, you're not going to be smelling the greatest. And overall, it just makes for not the best experience. And you're starting to get a little bit more of that anti-foreigner sentiment in a place like Lisbon, because it has significantly altered the price of housing, and it has pushed the locals out, and they are starting to get more of that Barcelona type vibe. Not saying it's at that level yet, but they are definitely headed towards that trajectory. Then we are getting into some of the more obvious ones, which is going to be a place like Mykonos or Santorini. I don't want to say all of the Greek islands, because there are quite a few of them, and not all of them have been absolutely destroyed by Instagram influencers and people posting pretty pictures. But Mykonos, Santorini, definitely not the best options to go to at this time of year. You're going to be waiting insanely long to get your Instagram picture, which Instagram, not reality, by the way. and these places are going to be ridiculously expensive in comparison to some of the other Greek islands and some of the places that I'm going to mention as alternatives. You could also probably throw Athens in there as well, because everyone is trying to do the same things. Which brings me to the last place on this list, which has some of the same issues as Athens, and that is going to be Italy, specifically Venice, Florence, and Rome. They are all going to be absolute nightmare tourist destinations, especially if you have not done pre-planning. The line to get into the Colosseum, for instance, is going to be absolutely massive. And so obviously you should probably plan ahead and get into a tourist group for that kind of thing. Same thing with the Vatican. But all three of these places in Italy going to be absolutely jam-packed, once again, like sardines in a can. And without some serious pre-planning, you're probably not going to be having your dream trip. I can see a lot of frustrations coming up because of the choice to go to these places at this time of year, which is summer. Now, some places that I would recommend in no particular order. This video has gone a little bit long, so I'm not going to get too in-depth into these places, but here are some alternatives that are certainly going to be less touristed than the places that I previously mentioned. And so I'm going to start with Ghent, which is in Belgium. This is going to be a great alternative to both Bruges, which is also in Belgium, as well as Amsterdam. I would say Ghent is a can't miss destination. Absolutely great time. And then next I would look into Mostar and Sarajevo. These places are in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but they have very different vibes. And obviously way less touristed than some of the other places that I have mentioned on here. Another place I would recommend, Belgrade, which is going to be in Serbia. Then I would also recommend a place in Bulgaria, which many of you may know, Sofia, but Plovdiv is an even better alternative in my opinion. I think Plovdiv simply offers more than Sofia does on a number of different levels. Now, a place in Italy that I would actually recommend, which is still rather close to Florence, is going to be a place called Siena. So you could actually base yourself out of Siena and go to some of the other surrounding places like Pisa and Florence and even Rome if you choose to do so. But Siena is going to be better value for the money and not going to be nearly as packed full of tourists, especially at this time of year. Now, the place in Spain that I recommend is Malaga. This easily could have been Cordoba, but I'm going to pick a place in between that many of you probably have not heard of, and that is Antequera. And the reason I specifically like Malaga is because Alicante is not too far, Cordoba is not too far, Marbella is not too far, and Seville isn't too far either. So it gives you a ton of different options and a ton of different places to explore. A lot more affordable than Madrid or Barcelona. Frankly, the region has a ton to offer. Now, this actually leads me to another place, which I know I'm going to get comments. It is not in Europe, but you'll have to forgive me because it is super close to Europe, and that is going to be Chefchaouen in Morocco, which is decently close to Fez, which is probably my preferred option in Morocco. But I think that is a really undervalued option in that area, obviously Northern Africa, not Europe. Then we're going to finish this list off with probably the best replacement for the Greek islands, as well as a place like Dubrovnik, and that is going to be Kotor. This is probably also a replacement for like the Amalfi Coast at a much better bargain value. And so, like I said, this video has gone way too long, much longer than I anticipated. And so I'm going to wrap it up here. Let me know your thoughts on these places and their alternatives, and if there is any place that I missed on this list, and what other recommendations you would give to people. Now, with all that said, thank you for watching. I truly appreciate it. Make sure to smash that like button if you haven't already, and I will see you guys in the next video. And as always, peace, much love.